The rain came down in sheets that Tuesday afternoon, the kind of relentless downpour that turns city streets into rivers and sends everyone scrambling for cover. But Sarah Mitchell stood perfectly still on the corner of 5th and Main, water streaming down her face, her hands trembling as she clutched a crumpled piece of paper. The eviction notice. 72 hours to vacate. 3 days to pack up. 17 years of memories, of her daughter's childhood, of the life she'd built from nothing after the accident that took her husband. She didn't cry. There were no tears left. She just stood there, watching the world blur through the rain, wondering how one person could fall so far, so fast, and whether anyone would even notice when she finally hit the bottom. The coffee shop across the street glowed warm and inviting, its windows fogged with condensation, the silhouettes of people inside moving in that comfortable rhythm of normalcy Sarah could barely remember. She had exactly $8.43 in her checking account. The overdraft notices had stopped surprising her weeks ago. Her phone had been shut off yesterday. Emma, her 12-year-old daughter, was at school, blissfully unaware that tonight they might be sleeping in their 15-year-old Honda Civic with the broken heater and the passenger door that only opened from the outside. Sarah finally moved, her soaked sneakers squelching against the pavement as she crossed the street. Not to the coffee shop. She couldn't afford the cheapest cup they sold, but to the small nonprofit office next door. The faded sign read, Community Hope Center, and Sarah had walked past it 100 times, always thinking it was for other people. People worse off than her. People who had really given up. She'd told herself she was different, that she was just going through a rough patch, that any day now the callbacks from her job applications would start coming. That was 3 months ago. The woman behind the desk looked up as Sarah entered, water pooling beneath her feet on the worn linoleum. She was older, maybe 60, with silver hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that seemed to see everything and judge nothing. Her name tag read, Margaret. Oh honey, you're soaked through, Margaret said, already reaching for a folded blanket on a nearby shelf. Let me get you something warm. Sarah wanted to leave. Pride is a funny thing. It keeps you standing even when sitting down would be so much easier. But something in Margaret's voice, the absence of pity, the simple matter-of-factness of her kindness, made Sarah's knees buckle. She sank into the plastic chair across from the desk and finally, the tears came. I don't know what I'm doing here, Sarah whispered. I don't even know what you do here. Margaret wrapped the blanket around Sarah's shoulders and sat back down. We help people who are having a hard time. No judgments, no hoops to jump through. Just people helping people. Why don't you tell me what's going on? The story poured out of Sarah like the rain outside. The car accident that killed her husband Michael 4 years ago, leaving her with medical debt that her insurance refused to cover. The job she'd lost 6 months ago when the company downsized. The interviews that led nowhere. The savings that evaporated. The credit cards maxed out buying groceries. The eviction notice. The fear that kept her awake at night. The terror that she was failing her daughter, that Emma would end up in foster care, that everything Sarah had fought for would disappear. Margaret listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding, her hands folded on the desk. When Sarah finally finished, the older woman leaned forward. First thing, Margaret said, you're not losing your daughter. Second thing, you're not sleeping in your car tonight. We have emergency housing assistance, and I'm going to make some calls right now. I can't afford. It's free, Sarah. That's what we do. But I need you to do something for me. Margaret pulled out a form and slid it across the desk. Fill this out. Everything you just told me, write it down. It helps us match you with the right resources. Can you do that? Sarah nodded, gripping the pen like a lifeline. As she wrote, Margaret made phone calls, her voice firm and assured, speaking a language of assistance programs and emergency funds that Sarah had never known existed. Within an hour, arrangements had been made. A short-term rental, paid for by an emergency fund. A food bank voucher. Contact information for a job training program that had a 90% placement rate. Numbers for legal aid to fight the medical debt. A counselor who could help Emma process everything. How is this possible? Sarah asked, overwhelmed. How do you have all this? Margaret smiled. Because of people like you, actually. You see that wall? She pointed to a board covered in photos and handwritten notes. Every person there came through here at their lowest point. And every single one of them, once they got back on their feet, came back. They volunteer. They donate what they can. They tell others about us. This whole operation runs on people who remembered what it felt like to need help and decided to make sure the help would be there for the next person. Sarah studied the photos. Faces of every age, every background, all smiling, all once where she was now. Something shifted in her chest, a tiny spark of hope she thought had been extinguished. There's one more thing, Margaret said, reaching into her desk drawer. She pulled out an envelope with, for the next her, written on it in elegant script. A woman came in here 6 months ago. She was in a situation very similar to yours, single mother, drowning in debt, facing eviction. We helped her, and she got a job, got back on her feet. Last week, she came back and left this. She said to give it to the next woman who came in looking the way she felt that day. I think that's you. Sarah opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was $500 in cash and a handwritten note. Dear her, you don't know me, but I know you. I know the shame that keeps you from asking for help. I know the fear that wakes you at 3 in the morning. I know the weight of feeling like you've failed at the only thing that matters. I know, because 6 months ago, I was you. The woman who helped me, Margaret, told me something I'm going to tell you now. This is not your fault. You are not weak. You are not a failure. You are a human being caught in an impossible system, and needing help doesn't make you less than, it makes you brave. Take this money. Use it for whatever emergency comes up next, because they always do. And when you're back on your feet, not if, when, come back here. Pay it forward, not because you have to, but because you'll want to. Because you'll remember what it felt like to be drowning, and you'll want to be the hand that reaches down. You're going to make it. I promise you're going to make it. With love and solidarity, someone who understands. Sarah read the note 3 times, tears streaming down her face, but these tears were different. These tears were mixed with something she hadn't felt in months, possibility. I can't take this, she said, trying to hand the envelope back. Yes, you can, Margaret said firmly. And you will. Because 5 years from now, you're going to walk back through that door and leave an envelope for the next person. That's how this works. That's how we save each other. Sarah left the community Hope Center 2 hours later with a folder full of resources, an address for temporary housing, and the envelope clutched to her chest. The rain had stopped, and the late afternoon sun was breaking through the clouds, painting the wet streets gold. She picked up Emma from school and told her daughter everything, holding nothing back. Emma cried, then hugged her mother fiercely. We're going to be okay. Emma asked. We're going to be okay, Sarah confirmed. The temporary housing was small but clean, a studio apartment in a building that housed other families in transition. The training program Margaret recommended specialized in healthcare administration, a field Sarah had never considered but found herself naturally drawn to. Within 3 months, she had a certificate. Within 4, she had a job with health insurance and a steady paycheck. Within 6 months, she'd moved into a permanent apartment and established a payment plan for the medical debt. On a Tuesday afternoon exactly 1 year after she'd stood in the rain holding an eviction notice, Sarah walked back into the Community Hope Center. Margaret looked up from her desk and broke into a wide smile. I knew you'd be back, the older woman said. Sarah placed an envelope on the desk. It was thicker than the one she'd received. Inside was $1,000 and a note that began, Dear her, you don't know me, but I know you. I want to volunteer too, Sarah said. Every Tuesday afternoon. That's when I came in. That's when someone saved my life. I want to be here on Tuesdays for whoever walks through that door. Margaret came around the desk and hugged her. Welcome home. For the next year, Sarah spent every Tuesday at the center. She answered phones, filled out forms, made coffee, and most importantly, she listened. She listened to stories that mirrored her own, to pain she recognized, to fear she remembered. And she became the voice that said, You're going to make it. I promise you're going to make it. One Tuesday, a young mother named Diana came in, soaked from the rain, clutching an eviction notice, her hands trembling. Sarah looked at her and saw herself. She grabbed a blanket, wrapped it around Diana's shoulders, and said, Let me help you. The cycle continued. Diana got help, got a job, came back to volunteer. Then Marcus came in, a single father who'd lost everything. Then Keisha, a widow with 3 kids. Then James, a veteran who'd fallen through every crack in the system. One by one, they came in broken and left with hope. One by one, they came back to extend the same hand they'd been offered. 5 years after that rainy Tuesday, the Community Hope Center had expanded to 3 locations, all funded by donations from people who'd once been clients. Sarah had become the assistant director, working alongside Margaret to build a model that other cities were starting to replicate. Emma was thriving in high school, planning to study social work in college. The wall of photos had grown so large it covered 3 walls now. Hundreds of faces, thousands of stories, all connected by a single thread, the understanding that we save each other. On the 5th anniversary of her first visit, Sarah stood before a crowd of donors, volunteers, and success stories at a fundraising event. She didn't prepare a speech. She just told her story. The rain, the eviction notice, the moment she thought she'd lost everything, the woman named Margaret who saw her anyway, the anonymous donor whose envelope